Oh, did they glue that one? They actually glued one. Holy. You can see the hot glue on there. HD15, you can see how it's bent. This computer we're reviewing today cost $5,000. We paid for it ourselves. Yes, it did hurt, and it hurts even more because it runs at 100 degrees Celsius on the CPU and downclocks. Allow me to show you why. If you look at this thing, it took me 1 second to identify the problem. And the problem, not counting this fan that fell off in shipping, but we did re-secure it for testing. The problem is Skytech installed this one, so it's going that way, and this one, so it's going that way. So there's no cooling at all happening on the fin stack. And this thing at $5,000 for the Skytech Mark 9 is just a really incredibly sad showing from a company that previously did pretty well. It was one of our 2 that we had recommended earlier this year, last year, for pre-builds, and they've fallen from grace a bit with this one. Especially because when Skytech sent us the test report for this, and it said CPU 100 degrees Celsius, their next question was, is there a problem with this system? Yes, there's a problem. Before that, this video is brought to you by Crucial, and it's DDR5 memory for Intel or AMD Ryzen CPUs. Crucial makes DDR5 kits that are deployable in Ryzen 6000 laptop systems and in Ryzen 7000 systems, or Intel Alder Lake, including both budget-oriented and performance-based memory modules. If you're building a new system, click the link in the description below to learn about Crucial DDR5 memory. So the problem apparently is not just, we thought it might be that they built it wrong, which is a problem, but it's at least one that can be kind of excused. There's enough people in the chain, okay, that can happen. But then when you get up to the CTO level, you get a test report, it shows this thing is thermal throttling, and they still ask if there's a problem. It tells us this is actually company-wide, where there are QC issues, there's building issues, actually an order building QC, and then apparently at the very top, there's escalation issues, where even once escalated, it's still not clear what the problem is without just directly saying it. So this is one of the most disappointing builds we've worked on, sadly. At $5,000, the reason we actually bought this, the backstory, is because it was just after the Alienware system review we did. And when we reviewed that, we thought, well, that was $5,000. Let's give $5,000 to a company that will build it right. And then we can show the giant contrast. Alienware, $5,000, someone competent, $5,000. Well, now it's going to be Alienware and Skytech, $5,000. And a new challenger has arrived, question mark. Let's please edit in some kind of silhouette. That's what we're looking for. But for today, we're stuck with this. So let's get started with it. All right, so this thing, getting back to the core of it. First of all, 3090 Ti for the GPU. There's a 12900K under here. This cooler looks like it is actually bent as well, but it doesn't change the fact that their own test report, when it was still in the lab before it ever went into shipping, showed it at 100 degrees Celsius. So there's no escape for Skytech here because their own testing showed the problem. Anyway, 3090 Ti, 12900K, it's about the hottest set of components you can get right now today as we're filming. And at $4,600 or so, $5,000 with shipping and taxes and everything, this is about the highest end system you could have pre-configured for you. So for the fan, again, this fell off in shipping, but it fell off basically as it was installed. So we know the orientation. And once more, even if it somehow miraculously managed to go through a wormhole and flip upside down, it doesn't change the test report itself. So we just really want to make that clear for everyone. This has already gone through testing. Patrick reinstalled the fan and then took it back off to show you all what we got. But a fan falling off in shipping is not too bad. There was one other bit of shipping damage though. So this is clearly bent, very dinged up. Just shipping damage. So the real test here is not the shipping damage, it's what do they do about it. So we contacted Skytech. This was anonymously, they didn't know who we were. And we asked them, hey, the front panel was damaged. Can you help us? They replied within a day, which is awesome. So really good support there. And the reply was that they were willing to take the entire computer back at their expense, also awesome, and replace the panel. And taking the whole computer back makes sense because they're not sure what else was damaged, and replacing the panel makes sense. So that's all good. Now, again, the downside is the rest of the computer, which came out of their lab. All right, so for this thing, the way it's configured is there's 3 front fans for intake. These are actually 140 mil fans. They come with the Fantex P500A, that's this case, and with 3 fans for intake, plus, if we move this one out of the way, a rear fan for exhaust, we end up with, obviously, a straight front-to-back airflow pattern. The top is completely perforated. There's no fans up there, though, so you'll have some air escape, but that's okay. These fans should pull it through. Now, ideally, one of these fans would actually be on the front, not in the middle. It still works this way. It'll work a little bit better on the front, and then the other one should be in the middle, or you could just install them pointing opposite directions. But beyond the cooler problems, we can look at the GPU to see if there's anything else. So this is the 3090 Ti. We're going to go ahead and just disconnect this 12-pin and get straight into the teardown. Of course, as always, we're going to have the playlist for all these pre-built reviews in the description below, and then we'll also have the thermals and performance numbers coming up after this teardown section. I guess the thing I really can't get over is that they sent us the test report and then asked, is something wrong with this system? And we decided not to respond because there's times we'll kind of request a statement from a company, and there's times we don't. And they're strategic, and this time we're not requesting a statement because they've kind of already made their statement. All right, see what they chose. So this is an Asus TUF 3090 Ti. I have not specifically tested the 3090 Ti version of the TUF. We did test the 3080 version of the Asus TUF. It was actually a really good video card. So it's a real card. It's not like they're throwing some HP-style OEM card in there, so that's good. When inspecting this, to try and figure out what went wrong to have this fan go like this, I noticed that the fins on both sides of this had scratching from where the metal clip was previously mounted. So someone at some point, either at Skytech or maybe Nocto's factory, more likely when they were validating this, had it installed properly, had it pointed the right way, and then before it left Skytech's build facility, and while they ran the test that should tell them this is problematic, that's when it was installed wrong. Somewhere in Skytech's process, it was flipped around. But at one point it was done correctly. It just didn't make it out the door that way. I think that might be bearing grease down in the center. I don't think... Yeah, that's not... that's like from the bearings or something. I mean, it was running at 100 degrees Celsius during thermal testing, so it might be the bearings starting to get some damage. Okay, let's take a look at this now that we can see it clearly. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take the top of the case off, make this really easy. I missed a screw somewhere. Okay, now we can show you the problem, part 2. So you can see here that the cooler itself is pretty tilted, and it's hard to know if that's shipping damage. It obviously doesn't affect that the thermal results were terrible. Maybe they messed up the mount in addition to getting the fans backwards. That would be very unfortunate, though. This foam packing that was in here was in so tight, though, that we think it may have actually been too much packing, where it may have bent the cooler in the process of some kind of shocker vibe. So anyway, that's the story with that. Let's get this thing fully disassembled. Okay. So cabling, they've done well to cable manage here. That's a plus. They zip tied this huge stack of PCIe cables all together to the 12-pin converter adapter. And then USB 3.1 is fine. There's no glue or anything. 3.0 is fine, or whatever the nomenclature is today. What I'm looking for right now is if they've bent, glued, or only partially plugged something in. That 4-pin was a little bit loose, but is otherwise okay. EPS 12 volt way down here, past where the camera can see, is also fine. Although they did only, and this doesn't matter, but for purposes of being complete, they did not connect this additional 4-pin. So only the 8-pin was connected to the board, not the additional 4. It's not necessary. The power going through this isn't so much that it needs all of that headroom, but just kind of a small attention to detail thing. Oh, did they glue that one? They actually glued one. Holy shit, I haven't seen that. So you look down here, This is like a throwback to the Walmart overpowered PC. There's a blob of hot glue in there. Can you see the hot glue? So there's hot glue down at the base of this RGB connector. What's gonna happen when it comes out? Well, fortunately none of the pins came out with it, but you can see the hot glue on there. So I have not seen, I mean, I get it. I get why they did it, but I also don't like glue for a solution. I feel like there's probably something more elegant there that could be done, but I also understand they're trying to not have every customer calling with a need for help to replug that in. The rest aren't glued though, that's good. 4-pin's fine. USB's fine, all right, cool. Next step is the part I'm actually interested in, which is getting the motherboard out. That screw is loose, so that is not a good start. That screw's okay. This is kind of sad to me. It's more of like a, I'm disappointed because Skytech did really well the first time we looked at their system. And you know what, ultimately what this really means is a really good reminder that, and I think this is self-evident, but just in case it wasn't, that one build from one company doesn't necessarily reflect all of their quality. That's why we normally try to test their support system if we find a problem, which we did here, and other than the thermal issue, which they seem to be clueless to, they were very willing to help with the damaged panel, so at least there's that. Oh, that screw, check that out. This screw is like so loose I could probably move it with the magnet alone. Let's see. Yep. I don't have the actual driver in there. It was just spinning for a second with the magnet only. So 2 pretty loose screws. It was like, yes, some of these things can happen in shipping, but not all of them do, which is what I'm really trying to draw attention to is this is, they do not get a pass for, oh, well, it was mishandled in shipping, because shipping doesn't install the fan backwards, and you start getting 2 loose screws, a dinged up cooler, missed one, and a dinged up panel, and it's like, yeah, some of those might be shipping, but not all of them are. You can kind of see now better if you look along this as a flat edge reference, and then look at the bottom of the D15 here, NHD15, you can see how it's bent. So that should help illustrate the problem a little better. What I really want to know now is how they did on the cooler. Okay. If you look at the CPU, all we're seeing here is the reason that contact frames exist, and we have videos on these now if you're curious. So the pressure distro you're seeing there is sadly standard for Intel. It's not a Skytech thing. The SSD is fine, it's flat. I was just checking to see if they bent it like a banana, to quote Kingpin. RAM is, I mean, socketed fine. It's all fully clicked in. They seem to have a screw tension problem with this system. That one's correct. I can't turn that one at all. Oh, there we go. A lot of torque, I can turn it, but yeah, so they got a couple loose screws in a few places, and then the cooler. But that's the build. Let's take a look at the back really quick. So cable management's pretty good, actually. They've done well to leverage the straps that Fantex has provided. Everything is cleanly routed, and it's user serviceable. So I would say overall good. I mean, this could be done a little better. Probably should be like this. But given that it's running real tight there, I think we can give them a passing grade on that. All right, so that's it for the teardown. We've seen enough here. Let's get into the benchmark charts. We'll start benchmarks with thermals because obviously the backwards fan will probably affect those. We've reviewed the Fantex P500A case separately, and it's actually a good candidate for a high-end pre-built. The P500A is large, it cools well, and it's not exorbitantly expensive. We actually liked it in our standalone case review. That means that screwing up the thermals in this case will take a special kind of effort. And this build got the treatment it needed to screw it up. With the full system workload on the GPU and the CPU, we can see that the maximum core temperature of the CPU immediately jumped to 100 degrees Celsius in under 30 seconds after the render began. After this point, the CPU reported thermal throttling for the entire rest of the test. So this is obviously beyond unacceptable for a $5,000 computer.
That's $5,000?
Yes. So anyway, there's a Noctua NH-D15 in it, and even though Noctua certifies that the D15 can handle a 12900K, they've obviously done it in a way where Noctua can't handle Skytech's.
Do you get something else with it? Where's the 5K going?
Let's go to the next chart. We found that running CPU and GPU workloads simultaneously on this system resulted in low GPU core utilization, even with the 3090 Ti reportedly hitting its power performance limit. So the 64-degree average you're seeing here actually isn't reality, and we'll explore this more later. This chart simplifies how bad it is. Looking at average temperatures with the front panel on and off adds more evidence that the problem obviously is the CPU cooler, not the case. The only notable difference with the front panel removed is a slight reduction in average GPU temperature down from 64 degrees Celsius to 63. Great. If we save up enough of those degree Celsius improvements, maybe we can do something with them. But for now, the best we get is this system. Now for these, we didn't set the fans to a static speed. Normally, we would do that because it's a necessary control. However, they set themselves to a static speed of 100% all the time forever because it's overheating. So it is actually directly comparable. Here's a look at what we're losing for that incompetent configuration. The P-core is throttled down to 4,400 megahertz from their target of 4,900 megahertz. That is a massive loss, and it's not part of expected behavior. 500 megahertz averaged across all cores is a significant reduction. We're not anywhere close to what the 12900K should be holding. Skytech has effectively turned it into a part from multiple generations ago. But you're paying today's prices. Even the E-cores dropped down to 3,500 megahertz from 3,700 megahertz directly, and that's because of overheating. Skytech is just throwing away performance here with one of the most obvious flaws in a build that we've seen yet. But if we look at Skytech's QC certificate, shown here, it includes Prime 95 and Mark and certifies that they were both run on the system. But the email we got specified it was at 100 degrees Celsius, and apparently this, again, didn't set off alarm bells. We're still not over that, but to be fair to Skytech, the system is functioning as expected. It's just that the expected functionality is unbelievably bad and terrifying as a possible outcome for an uninformed customer or one buying for a kid or a friend or someone like that, where they'll never know what's actually gone wrong. So the certificate, it's not a lie. It's just that it certifies incompetence here.
It certifies that people have $5,000 to waste.
Finally, we ran another test with Mark alone to isolate the GPU since it was choking otherwise on the CPU limitations, and now the air-cooled 3090 Ti actually does well. It keeps the temperatures steady at 70 degrees Celsius with fan speeds peaking around 80%. It's a little high for these, a speed of 2,300 RPM, but thanks to the P500A and Asus's gigantic GPU cooler, the thermals are actually under control here. The system could be good. This is evidence of that. It's just the obvious happened with the CPU cooler. This is where we'd normally do game testing, but a couple things for this one. First of all, you don't need game testing on this to tell you that a 3090 Ti is better than a 1650 or something. We have those tests. You can check out the GPU reviews for them. And ultimately, this thing, it's built with just such unbelievable ineptitude that it'd be going back out the door right away anyway. So we're going to save the time on those and focus on things like noise and other aspects of why it's bad and just skip the games this time.
Well, I keep on thinking does it wipe your own wipe your ass?
Instead of games, let's look at the noise. Here's the chart where we plot noise over time. Normally, we see a gradual ramping curve as the fan follows the temperature pretty closely with maybe some hysteresis mixed in. That allows for a less audible change. Instead, what we get can be defined by an extremely technical term. The term is called bad. We know it's advanced, but try to keep up. The speed of the two CPU fans and 4 case fans is directly determined by CPU temperature, and therefore, all 6 immediately ramp to their maximum speed as soon as an all-core workload begins. I could hear Patrick performing this noise test through 2 walls. There is a curve, but the CPU overheats too quickly, and that curve turns into what we'd call a line. Because of the abrupt fan ramp, noise testing was at least pretty easy. At idle, we measured a noise level of 34.2 dBA and a 27 dBA noise floor, and under load, we measured a consistent noise level of 48.1 dBA. The ramp between the two only took 10 seconds, and this doesn't factor in the actually extremely loud and annoying coil whine from the Asus TUF 3090 Ti that we heard in some high FPS gaming tests, as the testing here didn't involve those games, and it becomes more of a noise frequency issue anyway than a volume one. Power testing was less straightforward than usually because the CPU was heavily throttled throughout the test. We typically report total system power consumption immediately after a Blender render begins within the turbo window or tau for Intel CPUs, and then again after the system has reached steady state. On the Mark 9, full system power consumption averaged 340 watts for just a few seconds after the render began, followed by a gradual decrease down to a steady 298 watt average. The short-term power is less than the Aurora R13's, while the long-term is essentially tied. But at least the Aurora had a deliberately lower than stock PL1 setting, whereas the CPU in the Mark 9 is downclocking accidentally due to heat. Running games adds the 3090 Ti's considerable power consumption into the mix, averaging 551 watts full system power in Rainbow Six Siege and 585 in Cyberpunk. Both are at 1080p here, and that's lower than the R13, but it's a significant chunk of the 850 watt power supply's capacity when considering the possibility of transient spikes or more intensive workloads. We're not sure that the system would stay online under heavy transients. The components all matched the brands and the models in the original order, which was unusually specific because of our level of customization. Normally, the SI has some freedom to select parts, which can lead to an overall lower price, but it can also lead to unexpectedly receiving absolutely terrible memory or an OEM-only motherboard with no BIOS update support, both problems that we've seen repeatedly. That was not an issue here, so they did well with that as well, although we also weren't trying to get a bargain on this one. There was no quick start guide included with the system. There was a link to an online guide, and setup didn't require anything unusual anyway. Remove the foam, plug in the peripherals, plug in the system, and power it on. As for those peripherals, the mouse and keyboard are the same ones we got with the other Skytech PC. They're cheap, generic, and technically functional, for now. The keyboard is a rubber dome, it's sturdy with a metal-backed design, and it has some extremely basic RGB lighting. Good enough if you're buying this for a kid or someone who might not have had sort of real keyboard experience before. The layout is backwards L, also known as, and we just learned this recently, Big Ass Enter. Or if you move to the hyphen, Big Ass Enter. We're not really sure which one. The one with an annoyingly undersized backspace key is the only thing you need to know. The mouse cord is only about 140 centimeters long, so it's shorter than the keyboard cable, and that can be restrictive with trying to route cables around monitors and other peripherals. Next up, BIOS and software. Unfortunately, the system shipped with all BIOS settings set to defaults, meaning that XMP was disabled. That's not good. We ordered and received the system with 4 16GB DDR5 5200 memory modules, but the actual memory speed was 4,000 megatransfers per second out of the box, which is what we used for testing. The last time we ordered a system from Skytech, it included higher spec memory that was actually downclocked to precisely match the order. This is the opposite, where they're not meeting the order, so there's a little bit of inconsistency, which isn't a good sign. Default behavior for the 12900K is to maintain a 241 watt power limit for eternity. It's a pretty long time, and it's already clearly beyond our system's cooling capability, so applying Intel defaults wouldn't have helped here either. Still, explicitly disabling MCE, if they had done that, would have at least shown some awareness of the potential problem. The rest of the default BIOS settings were acceptable, and all the fans were connected to the appropriate headers with working speed curves. And as for the software, NVIDIA's driver version was 512.59 installed in Windows, which was actually extremely up to date when compared to our order date, meaning at the time it was built, it was the right driver, and that's good, because the Mark 9 was built to order, so they're not imaging something with old drivers on it. As for the rest, the desktop was populated with shortcuts to various software we didn't want and support sites we won't go to, but the only bloatware already on the system was Asus's Armory Crate. We can't fully fault Skytech for that, but we'll happily fault Asus. Stop baking your garbage software installer into motherboards because it's disgusting. So that's it for the Skytech Mark 9. We think the problem, talking with Patrick about this, we're both pretty sure that the problem is as you get into more custom builds, it's more likely that they screw it up because there's no longer this big standard operating procedure they can follow. It's not cookie cutter assembly. There's different parts that the user might choose. And you know, I guess our thinking was it's one of two things. Either you custom order and you're going to get the best possible build. That's option one, because they're probably going to put their best builder or builders on it. Option two is that there's not enough SOPs in place, there's not enough QC steps in place, they don't have a canonical top to bottom pipeline they can follow, and this happens, where someone doesn't see that a fan is backwards. That should have, there's so many points that should have been caught because it ruins the system. That alone entirely brought this system down. And that's the part where our feedback to Skytech is, look, you got the previous one right. So we know Skytech can do a good job, and we praised them for that build, but it was more mass-produced. With this one, if I were a consultant getting paid a lot for what I'm about to say for free, my role, I think, would be to go in, analyze the process, and go, okay, we need a standard operating procedure to handle this step of the pipeline where this problem occurred. We need to go back and look at when the testing happens, and not just tell the QC technician, run this batch file with Mark and Prime 95, and then if it doesn't shut down, pass it. You need to teach them that, hey, 100 degrees is bad, and also so is like high 90s, and also even then look for throttling where the temperature might look low, but you're losing all the performance. This is all stuff that can be taught. The technicians who run these reports should be fully capable, but someone has to teach them what to look for, and there has to be a checklist. In fact, there was a checklist that we got that said the test was run, they signed it, but the problem is just running it isn't good enough. You have to think about it. So, and that comes down to management to put those processes in place and to educate the people doing the work so they know what to look for. Otherwise, they're like, I don't know what you want from me. So I think that's the problem here with Skytech. But that's it for this one. Check our build playlist for the other pre-builts and see which ones are actually good. Thank you for watching. As always, go to store.gamersnexus.net to grab a medium mod mat or a coaster or anything else from our store to help us out in buying the next one. And we will see you all next time.
So I can guess we can rule out Skytech sponsoring me.
Probably.